Good evening, fellow Modonauts. Let's take a look at the Falloff Probe, which is new in Modo 801. It's a new node in Modo 801 that we can use to capture some values from the scene and then use those values to drive different channels in the scene. And it's actually a really nice, easy visual way to do some simple rigging. So here we've got our little Boba Fett light switch. We've got a switch, we've got a panel, and we've got a light, and we also have some material channels we might want to drive with this. So really quickly, let's if we're going to do a tutorial about a Falloff probe, we need a Falloff in the scene. So over here in the setup tab, there's Falloffs listed in a number of these little side tabs here, and they're all the same thing. In particles, there's a Falloff, in dynamics, there's a Falloff, and rigging here, and deformation. There is a Falloff, this Falloff deformer here. They're all used a little bit differently, but it's the same item. It's all the same thing. So let's just grab a radial Falloff, and it pops it into our scene. Let's throw this down here in our schematic. And then I also want this mesh right here, the panel mesh, and you can drag it from there's a couple ways to get these things in the schematic, right? You can drag it from the item list, you can drag it from the scene. I believe you can just add selected right here as well, so we'll just do that. We got our panel, and let's add a node, under channel modifiers, probe, a Falloff probe. Okay, there we go, Falloff probe. So let's hook up these two items to the Falloff probe. First off, the radial Falloff, this purple, this graph connector, what they call a relationship connector in Modo, goes to the other purple thing here. That means these two items are now talking to each other. It's not a straight this channel driving this channel. It's a communication link between these two items, so they can gather information back and forth. The panel, we actually need some position nodes to hook up to our input position over here in the probe Falloff. So a couple ways to do this. Again, I can go over here to my position and shift click these guys and right click, add them to the schematic, or I can over here I have them selected because I selected them there. In the channel list, I can drag these over like that, and now I have my position channels. And new to 801, I think this is new to 801, where you don't have to hook these guys up individually. You can actually just drag these vectors over, and you see the dotted line there. It'll hook up, and you can see how it's a slightly different kind of line than this. But these are channel values. Remember, up here, if you hover, you can see that that's an item relationship, the purple. I can turn those on and off. And then the white lines, even if they're dashed, are channel relationships, okay? Not a channel relationship, it's a channel connection. Because we're driving this channel with this channel. And what we're doing here specifically is this probe Falloff node is gathering information from this radial Falloff, not the least of which is where it is in the scene, what the radius is, what the core value is, and a number of other bits of information. And the panel here is just providing the panel's position to the probe Falloff. So we can compare, what this node can do now is compare the position of this radial probe, radial Falloff, with the position of the channel. And not just the position, but also the extent of the radius as well. So that all that information is traveling down this purple link right there, and you don't have to hook them all up individually. Okay, so a couple things. Let me kill the little preview render over here. Let's take a look at how this works simply by adding a locator into the scene. So I'm going to press L. Now I've got a locator, and let me hide the wall. In fact, let me hide all the geometry, and I'll keep the switch. I'm sorry, the panel, because that's what we're using to drive this here. So I've got a locator, and if I take the locator's X position, let's say, and we can right click here and add channel to schematic, and now I've got the locator X position, right? And I can spit the output into the X position. You see it just jumped over exactly. Let me pull back here. That's a ½ meter grid, so it jumped over exactly 1 meter. So what we're seeing is the output of this probe Falloff outputs a number from 1 in the center, where if I look at my panel geometry, and you can see because I'm in setup mode, if I press O, that pivots and centers are selected centers are being shown. So that's if I select it, that's the center of the item. And the probe Falloff judges the distance based on the item's center. So right now, the probe center and the item center are in the same place at 0, 0, 0, so it returns a value of 1, which has just bumped our locator over to right there on the edge of the Falloff, 1 meter. Okay, so this can get a little confusing, so let's just reiterate how this works. We have a radial Falloff in the scene. and it's hooked up via this relationship connector to a probe fall-off node. And this relationship connector means the probe fall-off node can gather some information from this item right here, including its position in the scene, also the extent of the radius, and some other things, like the inner core radius as well. The panel here is giving its position into the probe fall-off, and the probe fall-off can then can compare the position of this guy, as well as the position of the outer bounds of its radius. And also, if I want to add an inner core here, where's a inner core, solid core, let's say 25%. So we can also send this distance to the probe fall-off node. Let me turn that back to 0 for now. And can compare it to the position of the panel. So it has all these parameters hooked up to the probe fall-off that it can compare to the position of the panel. And then it outputs a number between 0 and 1, depending on where the panel is in relation to all these other items. So right now, with the panel and the radio fall-off directly on top of each other at 0, 0, 0, they're perfectly aligned, so we're outputting a 1. However, if I were to grab my, my radio fall-off here and move him so far away from the panel that it's beyond the extent of this radius, it's now outputting 0. So that 0 is being fed into our locator's position channel, which is putting it back to 0. And if I put it, say, about halfway in between here, it's sending out a value of about 0.5, which is moving this guy roughly 0.5 meters over, right? Maybe like that or that. You can always hover over here to see what the value is. Of course, you can look over and grab this guy and look over here as well. It's grayed out because it's in a relationship, but Modo still tells you what the value is, which is just about 0.5. Okay, so we got that settled. I think we got that settled. So let's unhook our locator and delete our locator. And now, how are we going to use this guy in the scene to drive, for instance, the intensity of the light? Well, the first thing I want to do is let's bring my switch back on. I'm going to parent this guy. Let's move him back to 0. I'm going to parent him to the switch. So parent him to the switch. And now when I move the switch up and down, I'm moving my fall-off up and down. All right, let's back out a little bit and take a look at what we're trying to accomplish with this scene. When this switch is at the top of the panel, I want to output a 1 to drive this light to its fullest extent. And when this switch is at the bottom of the panel, I want this probe fall-off to output a 0 to turn this light off. Now, if we look at our scene here, a 0 is only going to occur when the center of our panel here, this center right here, is outside the radius of our fall-off. So if I have my fall-off and I press C to do channel haul, and I drag down the radius, and I think, okay, there, problem solved, right? Now that my center of the panel is outside of this radius, I'm going to be outputting a 0, which is what I want to put into the light, which sounds great. However, when I take my switch and move it halfway up the panel, now it's going to be outputting a 1 because the center of my fall-off and the center of my panel are the same, right? Let me just press O, and visibility, show centers, all. So when these centers are aligned, I'm outputting a 1. And if my switch goes up to the top, I'm actually outputting 0 again because the center of this guy is outside my fall-off probe. So what can I do to fix this? It's actually very easy. I can move the center of my panel. So if I have my panel selected, and I go to centers mode, and I can have I can lasso my center here, and press the W key, I can move my center, my panel center, up here near the top of my, we'll just say right here, to the top of my panel. So now, when I go back to item mode and I select my switch and put him in this position, and now the center of my fall-off is aligned with the center of my panel, and I'm outputting a 1, which is great. And when I come down here, I'm outputting 0 because this center is far outside the radius of, let me turn off wireframe here, is far outside the radius of my fall-off. In fact, I can even bring my fall-off radius back up, so it's just barely outside that now. So that will be outputting a 0 in this position. This node will output 0 in this position because the center of my panel is outside the radius of my fall-off. Okay, fantastic. So now I've got this set up the way I want to. Let's go ahead and drive something. So I've got my light here, and I want to drive the radiance. So if I right-click and say add channel to schematic, I've got my light intensity. So I want to maintain an intensity of 5 on this light. Let me just grab my switch here and move him back up to the maximum value there. So now it's outputting 1. So of course I need a multiply node. So math multiply, basic math multiply. And plug in the output into 1 and then 5 into the other. And now my light is back to a 5 at this maximum position. And you'll notice now that this is hooked up, if I start dragging interactively, you'll see the lighting change, okay, from 5 to 0. All right. We can also mess with the solid core here of our fall off. What this will do is give me some leeway. If I press C to bring up channel hall and increase that solid core there a little bit, now anything within that solid core is going to output a maximum value of 1. So that just gives me a little bit of a safety zone. So when I have my switch selected here, make sure to move the switch, not the fall off. Let me go back to shaded. You know, it can be 100% right there, anywhere kind of within the top here. I don't have to be exact. And down here at 0. Okay, so now we've got our lighting rigged up. Let's do a couple other things. Let's rig up some material channels. So let me slash and burn me up a preview here. Just divide that and throw a preview over here. Right now, Boba Fett's room is dark. And when he's dark, he gets scared and he needs a little bit of a nightlight on his light switch. So again, if I move this guy up here to up here at the top, we've got maximum light values, and I'm outputting a 1, and down here at the bottom, I'm outputting 0. So this presents one additional problem. I've got a material on my switch here. If I select my switch and then go press 4 to go to material mode, I can see I've got a little ring here, and it's over here in my shader tree, button rim. And button rim has a luminous intensity of 1 right now. See, I just turned it on in a luminous color. But I want to drive this luminous intensity, of course, with the switch. So if I right-click and bring the luminous intensity, add channel to schematic, now I'm in here. What I need to do, though, is when it's at the bottom here, when this is outputting 0, I need actually to output input a 1 into the luminous intensity. And when this guy is at its top, when this profile off is spitting out 1, I actually want this to be 0. So what do? I add some math nodes. That's what I do. Math to the rescue. So add channel modifier math. Let's do a subtract node. There we go. And then we're going to stick the output into the subtract node here. So right now that's a 1 because we're at the top, and we are going to subtract 1. So 1 minus 1 equals 0, which is going to turn off our luminous intensity, so now it's off. However, if I bring my switch back down to 0, 0 minus 1 is -1, which gives me a -1 intensity, which I do not want. If I hover there, it says original 1, current -1. So what do? I add another math node, so math. We'll just take the absolute value. So let's take the absolute value of -1 is 1. And I've got my luminous node back on. And Boba Fett can now find his light switch in the dark. So let's move my switch back up to the top. 0, light's on, luminosity is off. Back down to the bottom, which outputs a 0. But we are switching that, the old switcheroo here, with an absolute value to give that a 1. And while keeping the light off. So that's pretty cool. Is there anything else we can do with this scene? Modo 801 specific? Let me think. I think there's one other thing we can do. I'm going to add a channel handle to the scene. Double tap escape to drop everything. A channel handle is a new item in Modo 801. If you go to add item under other, you can select channel handle. And you see this weird guy in the list here. And what it is essentially is a user interface item or device to manipulate channels in your scene. So if I just press the move tool, I can move it around the scene like any other item. And its default shape is a disk. If I go over here to display, I can change the handle type from disk to, let's say, arrow, and put it on the Y, and have the move axis on the Y, which means when we drag up and down on it on the Y, it's going to do something. It's going to start spitting out values. So let's just move it down here. And to assign this guy to a channel, you don't do it in a schematic. I'm not driving a channel on this or using a channel on this to drive a channel on this per se. It's just a user interface enhancement to feed values into a channel. So if I select the switch here and our channels, I go to Y. You know, looking at this, let's go to properties. Like negative 0.1 is 0, where positive 0.1 is on. So let's just go back to 0 here. If I right-click here and say assign handle, and then pick my channel handle from the scene, it'll show all channel handles in this list that are in the scene. I just have one. Mode is assign or remove, so let's assign that. Oops, channel handle. Now that this Y channel here, if I drag this into the schematic, it's getting values from this channel handle. When I drag, I'm just dragging up and down in the channel handle. I don't have to have it selected. It's just a user interface device on my screen that I can drag on this part of the screen and manipulate this channel. Now, I'm not feeding any position data into this channel. This channel is not being rigged, so to speak, by another item in the scene. It's not being fed data from another item in the scene. It's just I'm just using this channel handle to essentially send data behind the scenes to this channel. Does that make sense? It's a little weird, a little bit different than what you're used to thinking of a driven channel, where one channel is linked into, like, the area light intensity here. This is being driven via the schematic. This is being driven by a channel handle, not the schematic. It's a little bit different. This is a free channel. I can input values into this channel here all I want, but I can also just adjust these values here by dragging on this guy, which is kind of cool. But also that means I can just drag him way off the base, right? He's way off the switch here. I want to limit him to just the switch. So put him back at 0 and delete the channel handle. We're going to do this with a custom channel. So over here in properties, under user channels, I can add a user channel, and we can call this switch channel, I guess, or switch on dash off. Hit tab, and it automatically takes that dash out to make a Modo friendly channel name there. And I am going to use a minimum and maximum value here. So that's going to be the maximum amount I can move it. So from 0.1 to negative 0.1, those values are that whole range is 0.2. So negative. So let's go stop. So let's do a minimum of negative 0.2 and a maximum of 0.2. Normally I would have these at 1, but you'll see how this works with the channel handle. So hit OK here, and now I've got this guy right here, this switch on off channel right here. I don't need the Y position. Let me just remove channel from node. So I just want that position there. So if I add a channel handle into the scene, just like I did before, now the channel handle is in the scene. Let's drag him down here. And this time, let's select the switch on off channel. I could select it in the channel list right here, or I could just select it in the properties list like this and right click and say assign handle. Let's grab our channel handle, hit OK. Again, we've got this disk shape, so let's move it over and quickly change the display back to arrow and vertical and Y. Move this down a little bit. So now if I drag on this guy, I'm going to be manipulating the user channel value right here. So see that channel moving up and down as I manipulate on it? And it's going to just jump in increments of 0.2, sort of a maximum one drag and lift with my tablet there. We'll get it up 0.2. See 702, I drag down and let go 502. So that was that minimum maximum of 0.2 we put in here, up or down. But we're still, if I right click on this, or if I link up this on off to the switches transform channel. So let's add this to the schematic. So now my switch on off value here, right? This guy, which is being driven by a channel handle, is going to feed its value into the its own Y position channel. So I can drag this guy back down. So right now I can drag it in one drag, that total of 0.4, which is kind of cool. On or off in one drag, and it sort of limits to that. But if I keep dragging, I can get it to go off still. So I need to somehow limit this channel from going below 0.1 and above 0.1, right? Okay, put that back to 0 for now. So what are we going to do? Let's do some math. Let me just pause this guy. So under conditionals, where channel modifier conditional logic, A is less than or equal to B. So let's throw this out here, and let's unhook this from Y and put it into A. So right now, when the switch on-off, let's take a look at this. When value B is 0.1, okay, so at the top here, so if A is less than or equal to B, which is 0.1, if it's less than or equal to B, I want to output that value. So either less than 0.1 or 0.1. But if it's not less than 0.1, if it's greater than 0.1, then I want to output the false value, which will keep it 0.1. So no matter what, this is going to output 0.1 or something less than 0.1. But now we've got to constrain this in the negative position as well. So let's go to add and then conditional. And then we want logic A is greater than or equal to B. So let's put the output here into A. And for value B, same thing, we're going to do negative 0.1. So if A is greater than or equal to B, so if it's greater than negative 0.1 or equal to negative 0.1, I want to keep that value. Okay, so we output, if it's true, we output value A. But if it's not greater than negative 0.1, in fact, it's less than negative 0.1, then I want to output the false value, which will keep it negative 0.1. So no matter what, no matter how high we go, if it's greater than 0.1, it's only going to spit out 0.1. And on this side, if it ever goes below negative 0.1, it's only going to spit out negative 0.1. So we'll spit this back into our Y position. And then when I drag on this guy, no matter how hard I drag in either direction, let me just unpause this. No matter how hard I drag, it's never going to get better than 0.1 right here. And it's never going to get worse or lower than negative 0.1. So that's pretty cool. So there's channel handles in our scene. I'm dragging these guys around. Yeah, that's it. Channel handles. Will you use them? I don't know. We'll see. I think they need to mature a little bit, but they're really an interesting user interface enhancement for Modo.